What event or incident happened at your job that caused a mass firing or mass quitting? I work in local government for an urban county. One of the departments reclassified all their employees as exempt, a designation designed for political appointments, fired them all. Only exempt employees can be fired without cause, and asked them to submit resumes if they wanted their jobs back. Their goal was to get rid of some employees they felt were dead weight. But it turns out, the most valued employees, the ones with readily marketable skills in the prime of their careers, just shook their heads and had jobs elsewhere by the end of the week. Furthermore, when you pull a stunt like that, word gets out, and resumes don't come flooding in. They are still trying to recover. I was the lead cook in $1 million kitchen at a multi-million dollar high-end restaurant. The executive chef had been there since they opened and worked his way from the bottom to the top in 4 years. That place was his whole life, and he was completely dedicated to it. The absentee owners had hired a know-nothing manager. After weeks of complaining, the owners had a meeting with the manager and gave him a week to get on top of his job. The chef went on vacation that week. The manager saw that as an opportunity to buddy up with owners. A week and 2 rounds of golf later, the chef comes back to work to a pink slip. 27 over 30 employees came in and resigned immediately after. I used to be a senior staff member at a web agency where the owner was completely bonkers. She'd already managed to run a previous agency into the ground and was in the process of doing the same to her current one. We were at crisis stage. We'd just about made staff wages for the month. I and another senior staff member had deferred ours to make sure all the regular staff got this. We had one big client who was providing about 90% of our revenue. That client was getting pissed as we were behind on a couple of projects as idiot owner lady had promised them unreasonable deadlines without consulting the team. So I have everyone working flat out. Weekend plans are cancelled. This is real crunch time, we need to keep this client. So boss lady shows up, late as always, and sends all the staff home with full pay. This is at 11 AM. She wants to have an urgent planning meeting with just the senior staff. Of course we had to do this on the studio floor, not the boardroom, as the studio had the big whiteboard. So she sent everyone home as it required total privacy. We are 15 minutes into the meeting. I shit you not, all she had currently written on the board was synergy, ideas, excitement when she declared that whoops she'd forgotten she had a hair appointment and fucking left. Oh, and as a parting gift she asked the senior staff members to spend the rest of the day moving around the office furniture into a new layout, most of which was screwed to the floor, as she thought it would energize and mix things up when the guys came back to work the next day. As soon as she left, the entire senior management staff decided to quit. We checked the incomings for that month, made sure everyone got paid, and then resigned. 60% of the agency resigned on the same day. All the engineers at one job I was in had their contracts changed too, that they had to buy their own tools. Due to the specialist nature of our jobs, we were all looking at over £4,000 per engineer. 10 walked and the rest threatened to strike. The boss had to give in and buy the tools himself. Train company in Sweden. One day many years ago, someone found a document stating some changes to overtime policy. It was just lying on a table in the middle of the break room. One copy only. Due to the nature of the business, there tends to be a lot of shifting hours back and forth. Sometimes we, drivers, can get home hours and hours early, and other times we get horrendously late. Hence overtime. This document stated that now overtime forms had to be filled for when we came home early, under time, so to speak. This otherwise already scheduled time would be withdrawn, and the company would then be able to reuse that time. Negative overtime. One copy on a table, and a few hours later people had come in from all over in a major huff. There were outright and immediate resignations, shouting matches, phone calls to union representatives, a huge outcry overall. Date on the document and the day it was found, April 1st. Much fun was had. In the early 90s I worked for a large construction company in Florida. I was on the road crew. One of the machines we used was called a mixer. The objective of this machine was to mix up the subgrade of a road. It has giant teeth that spin insanely fast. Well, my crew had laid down the dirt, lime rock and clay and now had to run the mixer over it. Well, someone set the blades too low and ripped an international fiber optic cable out of the ground. A clean cut would have been bad, but this cable was shredded beyond belief. It cost $100,000 per hour that this cable was down. Luckily I wasn't at work that day. When I came in the next day, anyone who was even near the incident got fired. My whole crew was extinct. To put into perspective, the cable was fatter than your upper leg and composed of thousands of glass strands. Every strand had to be fused back together. It cost the company millions. Total about 40 people were fired, and I was put on another crew. I used to work at a pickle factory in Michigan. When the new owners took over, they insisted they change the recipe that had been the same for over 50 years without consulting the workers. Some of the employees' parents and grandparents had worked there and apparently felt so strongly about the recipe that 13 people quit and the majority else were outside with signs the next days until eventually they switched it almost all the way back. None of those who quit came back. From what I understood, I caused a domino effect at a local big chain pizza place. The pizza place I worked at wasn't a full service restaurant, which they are mainly known for. It was a takeout or delivery only store, located in a shopping center with several other businesses. During the 2 years I worked there, we had gone through 3 store managers. The first manager was awesome. He was firm, strict, but fair. The second manager was a bit of a ditz. He went by the book, but you could tell his heart wasn't really in it. I think he preferred to be a driver than a manager. The third manager was an all-out bitch. She mistreated the employees, especially the men, and she'd do things that only benefited her, not others. I was getting fed up. She had put a suggestion box outside her office. I wrote a very lengthy suggestion that she treat her employees with respect. She basically fired me. She said I'd resigned. I didn't care. I was no longer under her tyrannical rule. A friend of mine who still worked there called me a week later and told me 3 other people quit because, like me, they got tired of her shit. Later that same year, I quit late summer, about 2 weeks after Halloween. My parents ordered a pizza from that pizza place's major competitor. They asked me to give the driver the money, and when I did, it turned out to be a driver I knew from the other place. She told me she quit on Halloween night because she wanted to take her 4-year-old trick-or-treating, but the manager said no. Then she, the manager, took off early, in the middle of a fucking rush, to take her own 8-year-old daughter trick-or-treating. The driver that was now working for the competitor told me she threw her hat at the manager, told her to fuck off, and quit right there. A year or 2 later, I ran into the old assistant manager, who was now working at an Arby's. She told me many others had quit, and that manager was no longer there. She and her husband were fired due to stealing money from that store. Karma. It works, bitches. I worked at a Dave & Buster's in a fairly low income area. We had parties of 8 or more come in regularly, and they would run up $200 checks, which was fine, since they had an automatic 18% gratuity for being such a large party. They decided to eliminate the large party gratuity option in hopes that it would inspire servers to work harder. Instead, we all started getting regularly stiffed on these massive checks. Within 3 weeks, over a third of our staff quit. Oh boy, I think I might have a story that wins this thread, but I'm way too late to this party. When I was in high school, I took a part-time job doing tech support for a dial-up ISP. The company was pretty small and only had a handful of employees. The owner's wife did hours and accounting. Her brother was in charge of the technical operations and was my boss, plus a web developer and the regular tech support guy, who were best friends. There were also a handful of developers at a sister company which develops custom software. My work schedule was evenings a few days per week plus normal hours on the weekend. My boss was usually there before me on Saturdays, but one week I was surprised to find the office locked. As the day progressed, I became increasingly confused by the fact that nobody else had shown up. There was almost always a few people at least passing through, but I'd been there all morning without seeing anyone at all. Finally, after a few hours, my boss walks in and said, "You're probably wondering where everyone is." He told me that everyone except me, the owner, and his wife had quit. He wouldn't say why, but assured me that it wasn't something I needed to worry about, and that, since his job was vital, he was going to stay at the company until a replacement could be found. I tried to find out what was happening, but he said I'd have to talk to the owner. When the owner arrived, there was clearly tension between the two of them. He also wouldn't tell me what had happened, but was very eager to make sure I wasn't going to jump ship. Eventually they hired new employees and found a replacement for my boss and things went back to normal. But I still didn't have any idea what the hell had happened, and the owner clearly wasn't interested in discussing it. Cut to a few months later. I'm walking around the show floor at the MACROSS conference in New York when I bump into the former tech support guy and former web developer. We spent a few minutes catching up, then the tech support guy grins and says, "Tech, so do you know what happened? Why everyone quit?" Me, no, but I've certainly been curious. Owner didn't tell me, and I didn't want to pry. Tech, he and his wife got excommunicated. Me, blank stare. Asterisk tech. Didn't you know we are all Jehovah's Witnesses? Apparently everyone knew each other from church, and Jehovah's Witnesses aren't allowed to have anything to do with people who have been excommunicated. It wasn't until years later that I learned that the owner and his wife were swingers, and someone in the church found out. My company has had a pay freeze for over 7 years. We've had 10 plus employees quit in our office due to this. The work is rather hard, and we are expected to work up to state standards, yet we are paid near minimum wage. We have patients' lives in our hands for fuck's sake. A friend of mine quit his job a year ago after the company was bought out by a place in Ohio that announced several things. Engineers would receive no raises in the foreseeable future because engineering was not the company's sole purpose. They slashed healthcare to the bone, and they changed dental plans to Delta, Ohio. Friend lives in Ma, where nearly nothing was covered. His leaving was followed by nearly 1/4 of the engineering staff. Gather round children and let me regale you with a tale of retail misery and woe. About 7 years back I worked at Best Buy. My store was located across from one of the busiest malls in the Northeast, in an area that was a mix of lower and upper class. Around July, the store started doing one of those promotions wherein they offer you magazines at checkout. You sign up for 5 free ones, and then if you don't cancel you start getting charged the yearly subscription fee for them. The cashiers were incentivized to get as many magazine subscriptions as possible. As I worked loss prevention, I really didn't care at all about this program. I didn't care until October. Suddenly we started getting massive complaints about people getting charged for subscriptions who never signed up for them. It started as 1 or 2, and we just assumed they forgot to cancel. But soon, several dozen angry customers were complaining to us, corporate, and anyone who would listen. We started an investigation. Lots of hot and shitty hours going through camera footage and register logs. Turns out, one of the cashiers, who was never an okay employee even on her best day, figured out she could just sign people up for the magazines, even if they said no, as long as they were a rewards card member and their info was in the system. She used this to get record number of subscriptions, and won the weekly prizes every week, until the other cashiers caught on, and started doing the same. In the end, it turns out that every single front register area cashier had done this, except for one kid who was hired a few weeks before the investigation. Word came down from corporate that we had to fire every single cashier except for the new kid. Oh, and the day they handed down this judgment? The Friday before Black Friday. That's right. With 1 week to spare before the biggest shopping day of the year, we were ordered to fire all of our cashiers. As you can imagine, this did not go over well with management, but their hands were tied. So we tried to hire and train as many people as we could in a week. But as you can imagine, that Black Friday was chaos. Some employees worked 20 hours straight, 10 in their department and 10 on front register. All managers and supervisors worked close to 24 hours. They even tried to convince LP to lend a hand, to which we laughed of course. I don't want to know how much they lost between the lawsuits from the customers for fraud and the labor board fines and complaints filed by employees held late on Black Friday.